Welcome everybody to the fourth Capstone gathering of the IHC's Public Humanities Graduate Fellows Program. As you all well know, our program is designed for doctoral students in the humanities and humanistic social sciences who are interested in developing and practicing their skills as public humanists. So as you also all know, all of the students in the program enroll in two courses, History and Theory of Public Humanities and Skills for the Public Sphere. Students also gain experience working in a community setting, either by completing an internship that the IHC establishes with a community organization, or by executing a project they have designed in collaboration with the community organization. And finally, which is why we're all here today, all Public Humanities Fellows make a capstone presentation, which we are very much looking forward to seeing today. So, and this afternoon's event will feature three of our fellows, Unita Adafard, Jordan J Tadisco, and Maya Zayn. I'm going to introduce each of them separately, and after their presentations, we'll invite our audience to participate in an interactive Q&A with the fellows, and we encourage you to use the raised hand function, which you can find under reactions at the bottom of the screen. Once you raise your hand, I'll call on you, and then you can ask your question directly to the fellows. You can also put your question into the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Please do be aware that we're recording this event and we'll be posting it on the IHC's website and also on our YouTube channel. So before I introduce our speakers, I do want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center is located. And I'd also like to pay respect to elders both past and present. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Unita Adafard. Unita is a fifth-year PhD candidate in the Department of English here at UCSB. Her research focuses on travel narratives between Western Europe and the Islamic world in the early modern era, more specifically between the English and Persian-speaking parts of the world. She hopes to create a public-facing online project in the near future that would feature women writers and travelers from her graduate research. So welcome, Unita.
For my capstone presentation, I will take you through my internship with the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation, and I will also go through some of the other aspects of the program which I have completed and take you on the journey with me. So a little bit about my own graduate research. As Susan introduced me, I am a PhD candidate in the Department of English. I'm in my fifth year. And for my research focus, I examine Anglo-Persianate travel narratives. So broadly speaking, these are travel narratives from the English and Persian-speaking parts of the world. And my historical focus is the 1750s to 1850s. So in traditional literary studies, that would encompass the long 18th century, Romanticism, Victorianism. And at this time, Persianate or Persian-speaking would have encompassed parts of Central Asia, such as Afghanistan, Tajikistan, also Mughal India, so South Asia, as well as the Middle East, specifically Persia. And with my theoretical focus, I bring in definitely gender and sexuality studies, particularly in my readings of some of these women who were traveling and writing at this time. I implement post-colonial and decolonial studies in my research, particularly for the Persian-speaking, but also the English-speaking parts of the research. And I also examine how what we consider traditionally as fiction and nonfiction sort of breaks down in some of these travel writings. So for my internship with the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation, I worked specifically with their house museum known as the Casa de la Guerra in downtown Santa Barbara, the Presidio neighborhood. And this statement taken from the Trust's website kind of showcases their mission quite well. So they steward the past and present of the Presidio neighborhood, inspiring preservation advocacy throughout the county in order to create a more vibrant community. So one of their projects, which is the House Museum, which I interned at, we created interpretive programming, which was geared towards 8th and 12th graders envisioned as educational tours. And these tours focused on the lives of the women of the De la Guerra family. So this is where I got to bring in my own personal research interests and my work in gender and sexuality studies to my internship. And as on the top right here, you can see Anita de la Guerra Robinson, who was one of the members of the family. And on the bottom left is Delfina de la Guerra. So these are examples of two of the women that I worked on. And with the tours, I envisioned not only working on the personal aspects of their lives, but also their engagement with civic and political society in Santa Barbara. So in order to complete this internship, I definitely went through some coursework and training with the IHC. And one of these courses with the public humanities was the first one which I took was the public skills course. And with this class, we learned a whole variety of skills to implement in a public facing position. However, the ones which I definitely honed in on the most were my public communication skills, web design, and content creation, which I got to practice for my final project, where I created a graduate student self and community care website that featured the works of various graduate student friends and acquaintances. And this was the early days of the pandemic, so thinking about how we were all implementing self and community care at the time. And I definitely got to take these skills to the internship later as well, particularly in blogging, which I'll talk about in a moment. And the other course which I took with the public humanities was our history and theory class. So with this class, instead of the student blog, which was more timely at that moment, I focused on my own research interests, but bringing it to a public humanities realm instead. So a lot of the texts which we worked on in this class emphasized engaging public to provide knowledge and ideas in ways which we would implement outside of an academic context. So one of the lessons which I took was to broaden my historical scope. So I envisioned this online archive, which could take you through the Anglo-Persianate women's travel history, but starting earlier than the 1750s and leading up to modern day. And I was inspired by two projects which exist online that showcase Middle Eastern history, one of which was the Mizan project, which you can see on the top right, and the Women's Worlds in Qajar, Iran project, which you can see on the bottom right. So these were my inspirations for my final project. And taking the lessons which I learned, the skills that I learned in these classes and moving forward to the internship, definitely some challenges had come up, primarily the remote nature of this internship during the pandemic, which was held during summer of 2020. So this all happened right as we were beginning this whole process. So tours were on hold. All of the employees were working remotely. We couldn't actually implement any of the programming we were creating, and meetings were being held over Zoom instead, but it was all happening all at once, really. And the trust and the CASA specifically were in transition to adjust to this. So I was in transition right with them. I was part of the process from the get-go, and we all created a hybrid method of co-working, primarily over Zoom, but also held some meetings in person, on site, socially distanced, but to be able to ground our work in the Presidio neighborhood. I went on a tour of the neighborhood and looked at the various buildings which were historically significant, which the trust worked on. And I also had to primarily work with colleagues instead of the public for feedback on my content programming. But in this way, I do feel like I took the skills that I learned and could implement them anywhere, especially because I was able to work on a number of different writing projects with the museum. So they had me working on a blog piece, which definitely I gained my skills from that course, which I took previously. They had me working on a public school tours, as I mentioned, for 8th and 12th graders, but also a visual media type of presentation, which could be held in person, could also be played over a screen, and there was a script which I wrote for that. So I got to flex various types of writing skills. And looking forward to how this program has impacted my future graduate studies and career path, definitely provided me my first formal introduction to the study of public humanities in an academic space. As I'll mention in a couple of slides from now, I've always had a personal interest in public-facing humanistic work, but this was my first formal introduction and my first formal internship as well with an institution like the CASA, with an institution like the Trust. And I do think that the program as a whole has helped me strengthen my public-facing skills. So in an educational context, creating those tours, but also collaboratively with my colleagues at the Trust, and also with my classmates and my instructors in the courses, and my communication skills in both fronts. And I do think, looking to the future, I feel more confident to pursue avenues in public-facing careers that are not just in academia, but outside of academia, such as an institution like a nonprofit museum. And zooming out even further to think about the value of the public humanities. So I often return to this quote from Robin Schroeder, thinking a lot about how the public humanities is simply the work of moving humanistic knowledges among individuals and groups of people. So if I had to phrase that myself, I would think about how the humanities are not just transmitted in academic spaces of higher learning institutions like universities, but technically in any public space this can happen. Collaboration, creation, learning, co-creating can happen. It can be a museum, it can be a gallery, it can be a sidewalk, it can be a library, it can be a website. So I think that's really what I've taken from this, is that the greater access to knowledge is priority for me. And that would segue into how I see my role as a public humanist, which would be, like I mentioned, I've always had this sort of interest. In the past, I thought of creating an online blog, perhaps for my own writing. I was brainstorming various ways to take my dissertation research in a public-facing avenue, but I didn't really have the tools at that point. So now, looking forward, I've been seeing more and more, even with the internship, thinking about the gap in public knowledge in women's history there. For example, I think about the research which I do in women's history between Western Europe and the Middle East and South Asia, and see an even greater gap in public knowledge. So I would love to, like I've mentioned, take that work and have it exist on an online archive of some kind, but also my interests have definitely shifted towards public history or biographies of such writers and travelers in the future. So we'll see what the future holds, but these are definitely ideas that I have in store. And this would conclude my presentation, but I've left some contact information there if you had any questions on any aspects, and information for the Trust as well as the IHC if some of you are less familiar. Thank you so much for your time.
I'd like to welcome our second speaker, Jordan J Tadisco. Jordan uses they, them pronouns and is a doctoral candidate in the comparative literature program. Their research focuses on trans-authored literature and diverse articulations of transness as influenced by race, gender, class, sexuality, and ability, found in trans memoirs, poetry, and fiction. And more specifically, they examine how trans people use literature and writing as a tool for self-making and world-making, and as a way to survive and thrive. Welcome, Jordan.
First, talking a little bit about myself, my research, and the internship I did. So I am, just like Anita, a fifth-year doctoral candidate, but in comparative literature. My research, as Susan mentioned, focused on trans-authored literature. I'm not going to repeat that, but I also have a focus on criminalization, hypersexualization, and carceralization in those narratives of transness. And that will become relevant when I talk about the internship that I did. And so I did my internship with Sister Mary Shawn Hodges and Tony Kim at the Partnership for Reentry Program, also called PrEP, of Los Angeles. PrEP is or provides correspondence-based life skills courses and other assistance with reentry. So they also help with, the parole process, writing letters on behalf of incarcerated people. It's not just those courses, but they help people throughout California and even beyond. And what's also important to note is that a lot of these courses are led by people who are incarcerated and taught by them, or, and a lot of the people working at PrEP in Los Angeles are previously incarcerated people. So they definitely have this attention to the community all throughout the programs they offer. And then my specific role at PrEP is that I worked on researching national, state, and local grants in order to increase the fundraising that we could do at PrEP. And I also created ways to organize participant data and gather additional information and feedback more systematically. So I'll have a little bit more specific information about that on in a couple of slides. But first, taking a step back, how did the Public Humanities program at UCSB prepare me for my internship? So just like Susan mentioned at the very beginning, before heading into the internship, I attended 2 classes offered by the IHC, History and Theory of Public Humanities and Skills for the Public Sphere. And I also participated in the Foundations in Humanities Prison Correspondence Program, so another program that the IHC offers, which was launched in 2016 in partnership with PrEP LA. And as part of that program, I attended a prison pedagogy course offered by the IHC with Susan. And so these 3 courses really laid the theoretical foundation, which that influenced my perspective on academic and public-oriented work. And they gave me very pragmatic skills needed, right? The grant writing skills, the budgeting skills, data gathering and organizing, survey making, public writing, and more. And in addition, participating in the IHC's prison correspondence program taught me about California prisons, which I didn't necessarily know a lot about coming from Europe, the sort of system of mass incarceration in the US, and the need for both access to education while in institutions, in prisons and jails, but also the assistance with reentry after or upon release. And so more specifically now, what did I learn from my internship with PrEP? How did I use those skills from the 3 courses and use them to improve other skills or increase my knowledge? So as I said before, my internship was focused on 3 main areas: researching grants opportunities, organizing current participant data, and creating surveys to systematically gather additional data. And this was really important that we're all linked together, because while researching grant opportunities, I realized that often the foundation releasing those grants were looking for data or information about participants that PrEP did not have at the time. And so it was important to create those surveys to gather more information. And each of these areas helped me develop interpersonal communication skills. And especially, as Unita mentioned, my internship was also over Zoom. So we had a weekly meeting, but everything was on, via text or via email. And so it was a different set of communication skills to use. But I also improved the following skills. I increased my ability to find grants and develop a better understanding of the specific language of nonprofit funding. Something that we had already started learning in IHC courses, but that definitely needed the learning curve was steep once faced with the actual documents, right? I also developed my database skills by sharpening my knowledge of Excel and learning analytical tools to create graphs and charts for participant data. I'm not from a social science or science, background. And so that was a skill I needed to definitely train. And I also sharpened my survey creation skills. And really the main dilemma or the main focus for the survey creation was really how to best phrase survey questions so that the survey could grasp the breadth of human experience faced by the participants, while also yielding results that could be easily analyzed and quantified for fundraising, right? That could easily be transformed into easy to understand sentences to send to fundraise to grant offering institutions. Oh, and briefly before I jump into that, one specific example, for instance, of some data they didn't have. So I found a grant that was for young people incarcerated that were parents. And so although PrEP did have information about who was a parent because they have a parenting class, they didn't necessarily gather information about people's ages. And so they didn't necessarily know who is younger than 25, right? how much of people 25 and less are we reaching throughout our programming? And that was something needed for that grant. We needed to address that. And so I created a survey that would gather that kind of information and more. So why do I consider myself a public humanist, and what is the value of such work? So as a first-generation college student, I really came to academia with the desire to conduct research and produce writing that would be accessible by and beneficial to communities beyond. I really wanted my mom, my brother and sister, right, to be able to read what I write or care about what I do. And so I really saw myself as trying to talk to the public at large. And I didn't necessarily have this specific vocabulary when at 18 I came to college, but I've always considered myself a public humanist. My early goal was to study translation back in France in order to make English sources and resources about transness available to French speakers. Back then, a lot of websites, a lot of books were still just in English, and a lot of trans people were having a hard time accessing that information. And now my focus is on literature and storytelling and how it can become a tool for trans survival, thriving, and joy, which I really see as focused on real life issues or real life events that are going on in trans people's lives right now. And in my opinion, what I've seen in academia is that most academic work is based on knowledge extracted from communities beyond academia. But it's really my personal belief and my conviction that it's vital to stop this extractive mode of interaction, to instead provide resources to community-oriented organization and really value their knowledges and expertise equally, right? Not just we're gonna give you all of these resources and help you with that, but also see those community-oriented organization as equal partners. And as people that can teach us things as well in academia. And so what is the impact that the public humanities program will have on my professional future? My career goal has not necessarily changed. I'm still hoping, fingers crossed, to get a tenure track professor position. But I think I will now be a different kind of professor. I will be someone that now has the tools and skills required to seek collaboration with community partners, build classes and programs in communication with the public, and focus on issues facing the community. And I have several ideas as to what kind of programs to put in place, but it's going to depend on the institution, on the communities, what's their needs, and that kind of thing. I'm also looking to work with newspapers, media outlets, and streaming services to make sure that the work I do is accessible and expressed in accessible language. And I also, in my research, in my dissertation, I look at the public and at community organizers as authorities and experts in and of themselves, right? And their knowledge bears the same weight as that of scholars and within academia. And that's it. So thank you. And as Susan said, we'll take questions at the end. So take notes, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions later.
All right, our third speaker, Maya Zaynetinova, is a fourth-year doctoral student in the Department of Global Studies. Her research focuses on the impact of blockchain technology on global governance, climate crisis, and global power structures, and her public humanities work connects digital technology and humanistic knowledge. Welcome, Maya.
This is my concluding project as a public humanities fellow, which concludes 3 aspects of my work, 2 courses and an internship. So to start, I just wanted to introduce myself and my work a little bit to you. I'm a 4th-year PhD student in global studies. And like Susan already shared with you, my research focuses on global political economy and governance and blockchain broadly, but I also am particularly curious about the discourse of decentralized technology, cultural interpretations of it, and social and environmental impacts of decentralized technology. And kind of a big goal of my work is to connect humanistic knowledge and technology. So that's why Public Humanities Fellowship felt like a perfect opportunity for me. as part of my practical component of the internship, of the fellowship, I was an intern at Direct Relief in the summer of 2020, which I'll tell you more about in a little bit. And my project for the internship was a bi-monthly newsletter on the organization's response to COVID-19. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I learned throughout the coursework that we did. As you know, there are two components, one practical, one theoretical, and I will start with the practical one because that's what I took first right before my internship, which was really useful because I wasn't actually very tech savvy. And that was the time when the pandemic hit us. So the number one skill that I had to learn was digital management, project management, and digital communication broadly, because we all faced Zoom reality back at that time, almost 2 years ago. And the most practical and result of the course was the creation of a website and just development of the website generally, because I didn't know much about hosting or domains. So with the help of the course taught by Erin, I learned how to buy a domain, how to create it, how to design a course. We also looked at social media campaigns and how to structure posts and how to communicate with our audience, communicate our research in an accessible way. And also work with community partners, analyze reports, and do budgeting and many more practical skills. The second component of the coursework that we did was theoretical. So it was really helpful to take this practical knowledge that we learned and put it onto historical and theoretical base. So we looked at history, definitions, and goals of public humanities as an emerging field. And especially what stuck with me is the role of universities and pedagogy for in the public humanities sphere specifically, as well as some new evolving fields, which I'm very excited about, such as digital humanities, especially in the realities of the pandemic. And we also looked at queer in humanities, which Jordan actually was one of the leads on. And as a conclusion of the theoretical part of the fellowship, we did a publicly engaged project. And in my personal case, I connected my research interests and community partners here in Santa Barbara and looked at blockchain solutions for environmental activism. And I worked with, I used the use case of the Blockchain Acceleration Foundation and Community Environmental Council for my theoretical final project. And as the main practical aspect of the fellowship, I was very fortunate to work with Direct Relief. And Direct Relief is one of the biggest philanthropic organizations in the United States, and they work both within the United States and internationally. And their main goal is to provide humanitarian assistance in disaster situations. So you can imagine how overwhelmed the organization was when, on top of all the disasters already happening, such as wildfires, humanitarian crises abroad, we also suddenly had this pandemic. So the main task for my internship was actually to create a digital newsletter to share with the audience, with the public, of how the organization had to pivot its work and mostly focus on the response to COVID-19. So I was responsible for compiling the information and putting it together in a newsletter twice a month. And this newsletter was sent out to members of the organization, donors, and outside audience. And that was kind of their reporting mechanism and communication tool to share with the broader public of what the organization was doing in distributing personal protective equipment at the time. So this position was very interesting to be in and quite challenging because just like Unita and Jordan, I had to pivot to a remote way of working, which was very unusual at the time because it was back in 2020. But throughout the internship, I learned a variety of both hard and soft skills. And when it comes to hard skills, I learned how to use MailChimp for newsletter creation and design emailing for the audience, how to organize photos and other media materials, charts, how to use coding to edit text within the newsletter. That was also something very new to me. And also how to use other platforms, because, you know, I finally learned how to use Zoom, and then turned out that the organization was actually using Microsoft Teams and Outlook for their emailing and calendar. So that was all new to me. And as for the soft skills, effective team communication was a big one, especially in the realities of remote work, and coordination of busy schedules with many team members, because the organization is one of the biggest ones. So there's so many people to coordinate and meet with, to talk about what their division doing specifically to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how to put it concisely in the newsletter to make it easy and interesting to read for the audience. And so concise and public-oriented writing was also one of the main soft skills that I learned during my internship at Direct Relief. As for overall fellowship's impact on my professional career, there's so many ways the public humanities program helped me shape myself as a public humanist and a public facing scholar. I became more confident in doing more public facing research and engaging digital platforms like the website, social media. I also was able to create more contacts in the nonprofit sphere, because I am considering future employment outside of academia as one of my options. So that was a really helpful skill to see how is it to be outside of academia while still doing research, and how to become a more confident communicator, both online and offline. So, and writing for non-academic audience was also a very valuable skill that I took out of this fellowship, because in academia, we tend to focus on academic jargon quite a bit. So that was very practical. And as for kind of my takeaway on the value of public humanities, to sum up, I think the most important aspect of public humanities is connection between humanities education and communities, and doing research that, you know, strives for audience-oriented activity. And I think the key words in public humanities is co-creation and co-interpretation of shared problems with communities. And it can also be political, what we learn in Susan's class for the theory and history of public humanities. And I think it's really relevant in the modern day to promote democratic knowledge creation and critical thinking through engaging in public humanities work. And overall goal of public humanities, and it really resonates with me, is to achieve a positive social change and connect scholarship and advocacy. And lastly, just wanted to conclude that I am very proud to be a public humanist, and I would also call myself a public digital humanist, because everything is online these days. And I think it can be understood in four main ways. First of all, I think it's important to challenge this, you know, perceived superiority of STEM disciplines, right? And I think we in public humanities notice it all the time when it comes to funding and overall kind of narrative around what disciplines matter more. So I think it's really important to refocus on the importance of humanities, right, for creation of this democratic knowledge and connect it with technical disciplines. So that's what I'm trying to do through my work, combine humanities and technology, because oftentimes in the technological discourse, people forget that technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's created by people for people. So there is a fundamental humanistic aspect in it. And critically engage community partners and organizations, and which is another big aspect of public humanities, right? Working with multiple actors, it could be nonprofits, governments, agencies, and smaller groups. And lastly, I strive to work with communities impacted specifically by the spread of decentralized technologies of blockchain and make this co-created knowledge more accessible, because especially in the blockchain world, in the humanities specifically, this topic seems to be oftentimes misunderstood or not understood fully. So creating this accessible knowledge is also a big part of my work as a public digital humanist. And I also wanted to thank Susan and Erin and the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center for such a great opportunity to be a fellow at the center. And I look forward to staying in touch and working with all of you, maybe on some future projects. Thank you.
Maya, thank you so much. And thanks to all three of you really for inspiring and outstanding presentations. So we have a little bit of time. Let me open it up to questions, comments. Well, while you're thinking, I want to just point out something about the work that these three scholars and fellow scholars has done. Each of them had to do this work during the pandemic. All right, this was a tremendous shock to everybody, including the organizations with which they were working. I mean, shock in the sense of really a traumatic pivot. And each of the fellows came in and did incredibly impactful work. I mean, UNITA was creating resources. Maya, whom I had the privilege to meet with every other week, was responsible for communicating to stakeholders, which was very important. You were sort of in the eye of the storm, and it was tremendous. There was a lot of pressure and to do well and to do well in a timely way. And there was a lot at stake. And it is not an overstatement to say that Jordan's work in grant finding and making and understanding how the organization needed to be brought into focus, the missing information, is helping the organization survive, because the organization survives on these kinds of funding awards. So this work had immediate impact, and it was done while everybody was working in a new reality, which I find an extraordinary achievement for everybody. And I never heard anybody complaining, really. That's which I find is lovely, that there was a sense always that this was an opportunity that everybody had as they were giving and participating so much in the ways that they've described. So I think it's very important and to be recognized how difficult this was. It's difficult to do an internship for so many reasons. For one thing, the partners don't always fully understand how to lead the interns, how to provide mentorship for the interns. There's the interns at times have to teach their partners how to be mentors. So it's a real collaboration in ways that we don't always even expect. So there were all kinds of challenges that are inborn and also just added given the world in which they were working. So yeah, I think that's extraordinary. So we have
if you want, I think we had a conversation about this very point with Erin in our bi-weekly every 2-week meeting of was it self-starting? Am I remembering?
How to be a self-starter.
Yeah.
A lot of people are really excited to hire self-starters.
Yeah.
And in the ways in which you sometimes have to, I guess, lead the leaders into how to lead you. I don't know how else to say it, but it was quite unclear what the internship what they wanted me to do at the very beginning, and we had to figure that out together, right? And that was also a process that I've never navigated before, because in classes the professor arrives and tells you this is what we're going to do, right? So that was a great skills to develop, definitely.
Yes, Megan.
I have a question for Jordan, because I'm just curious about this, like this this moment when you realize that the thing that they really need is data collection on the age of the parents. And when you kind of like, when you come in with these kind of whatever your ideals are, whatever, and then it turns out there's this kind of thing that could potentially be a make or break situation for the organization. And I'm interested in kind of like, I guess, just sort of how that is. I'm curious about how that was for you, I guess, as in, coming in with kind of whatever you were thinking to begin with, and then realizing that some of these tasks are going to be like very, very much nitty gritty, and like how you relate that to kind of what you felt like you were trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, at first it was somewhat awkward for me because I didn't want to tell. I mean, Prep has been doing the work that they're doing for a long time, and I didn't want to come in with the pretense that I knew what they should do. Like, that was just a very odd position for me to adopt, to come and say, oh, to get these grants, you should do this and you should do that. What was an odd position for me to be in. But I think they were just after the first meeting, they were just very grateful, right? They were just, because I think they just have so much work to do every day that it's hard to keep track of those longer term thing, or those things where the deadline is in 4 months, right? But I have things to do today, and people's survival depending on them that day, right? Because they also deal with so many things at their office, where they provide food for people who want to come, and they have, clothing donation, clothing exchange kind of thing. Like, they just do so much that it was hard to focus on these other things. So I think they were just very grateful. And after the first meeting, it was really not awkward anymore. It was just, I think then for me, sometimes I would tell them something and they would just be like, yeah, great, thank you, we're grateful. And I was like, but are you sure it's a good idea? Because it's not because I'm saying that it's necessarily a good idea that we need to do, right? So then I had sometimes to like make them think about that thing too, or things like wondering with them, like, well, are we encountering privacy issues if we ask for the age of the participants, even though that's what we need, right? And how do we think through that? I don't know about policies and rules and regulations, if there are any about that, right? So we also had to think about all of these things together.
What you're saying just now reminded me of some years ago, I guess like a social work friend of mine talking about, like, I can't think about the bigger picture, I'm neck deep in crocodiles. Whereas, and someone comes in and just like, you have that space to.
Yes, Shomak.
Thank you so much. These were all excellent presentations and actually reflected the great work all three of you have done. My question is, I think after seeing all the three presentations, it was very clear that all of you have done very good public facing work. I mean, you have collaborated with the community, and some of you have said that, obviously, I think all three of you said that definitely taking a position in an R1 research university or in any university is definitely among your future aspiration, right? But I was thinking that how do you see, with regard to your experience, your desire to learn more about how the academia functions currently, and in terms of changing that? For example, I mean, have you sort of desired to learn more about the resources or the infrastructure that make academia what it is? I'm saying, for example, when we pivoted into online teaching, March 2020, just before that, there was this huge COLA movement, right? And the COLA movement took place partially because we were all fed up with how academia was functioning at UCSB, and also probably at large in the United States, in terms of the administration and the way we alienate the administration within the university. Perhaps none of your work was actually with the university administration, though that can be an internship opportunity as well. But did you desire to sort of learn more about it, that how actually the academia functions financially, where the resources go, and how to sort of change it? Because I know all three of you, either in present or in recent past, were associated with community work within the university community. So I know that for sure for all three of you. So are you trying to look at, to sort of work in the academic administration to sort of change it? Because it's obviously it's not functioning in an ideal manner, right?
I can go first, Shamak, if no one. I guess I can. It's funny that you asked that question because, well, Jordan and I also on the GSA at the Graduate
Yeah,
Student
I know that. Yeah.
Association. So that's probably where I learned the most about how the university functions. So unrelated to the fellowship. However, I think if I end up in academia as my employment, which depends on certain factors, right? Especially the job market, as we know, trying to be realistic, how limited it is. I think it's really useful to actually take my experience in working outside of academia, even like direct relief, and actually take that culture of collaboration and teamwork and try to bring it to the university, right? Kind of more horizontal structure, more team work based activities. Rather than kind of a more bureaucratic hierarchy that currently exists in the university, maybe more transparent funding. So I think there is a lot to be changed for sure. So definitely a big area.
Anita, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Shomak. It's a great one. I think that two things have really impacted, two experiences have impacted my sort of perspective on this. One being this fellowship, but also I was at the Transfer Student Center for a while as their graduate mentor and program assistant. And that center, along with its sister center, Ondas, which works for first-gen students, I sort of saw that as an ideal space in a way. If I were to not work as a, in a sort of faculty position, I would think of that as academic adjacent or academic services type of work where, you're still in the administration. And I saw the, leaders and the founders of that at those centers doing incredible work to sort of negotiate and navigate the administration every single day and actually I saw them doing daily also like incredible things for students. So I would think that something that could bring, some of the sensibilities of a nonprofit like a museum, but also meld it with that type of work, I think would be something I would be super open to. But that is a really good question as far as the administration. I will be thinking about that.
Jordan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I can as well. I mean, and I know Shomak, that just like I am on GSA. I was on the Korean Trans Graduate Student Union board. Through GSA, I'm on a lot of health insurance meetings. I worked in student affairs with the Resource Center on Sexual and Gender Diversity. I think a lot of admin, I sit on academic senate things too. Like I'm really interested with a lot of those admin things as an opportunity for change, right? Because I think I do believe in radical change, right? That does not necessarily happen within the university channels. But while that radical change happen, I think that there's also smaller change that can happen within those channels. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. As a graduate student, it's not that easy, right? Compared to maybe being a faculty or higher admin, higher staff position. I think one thing I want to mention, and maybe that's a little bit different from your question, but it's a thing that I think I mentioned to Erin one time, or she mentioned it to me too, is sometimes I feel it's difficult because that work is not necessarily valued in our PhD or even as in faculty, right? If you're in a faculty position and you're doing public humanities or public facing work, that's not always valued the same way in your tenure track or tenure or merit evaluation, right? And as a graduate student, if you're doing all of these admin things, it doesn't really move you forward in your program, right? So I think it's hard for me. That's also an issue, is that a lot of these things end up being in addition to what is seen as a core duty of an academic instead of being, essential to the work of an academic. And so I think there's also work to do that way. And I know that IHC is doing that work of trying to open up what's seen as academic work at, during merit or recruitment things, but I think there's also that need on the graduate level. But yeah.
It's a
Thank
very
you.
good point. Yeah. All right. Well, I know we have run over our time, I think, for very good reasons. So I want to thank Unita, Maya, Jordan again for these inspiring and excellent presentations. It's great to see everybody, and we look forward to hearing from all of you too in the future. So be well, be safe, and hope to see you all in person sooner rather than later. And congratulations to Unita, Jordan, and Maya. So thank you.